Hello everyone, this is Sam Spade with a quick GameMaker Studio 2 update. You can now create default arguments for your functions. This ability to create default arguments was just added in the most recent update 2.3.3, and it's pretty great. Here's how it works. When you are declaring your function, after the name of the argument, you type equals, and then the value or even expression that you want to be the default value for that argument. If you pass in a value, the value that you pass in will be used instead. But if you don't pass anything in when you call the function, then this is the value that the argument will get. But let's demonstrate this with some practical examples. So here we have the vector random function that I used in my recent vector and steering behavior tutorial. This function, which also happens to be a struct constructor, but that won't matter, has an optional argument, length. If you pass in a value, length will use that value. But if you don't pass in any value, then length will be undefined, so this line of code will set it to 1. With the ability to create default values though, we can come up here, we can type length equals 1 and delete all of this code. This will do the exact same thing, but we literally have to write less code, and at least in my opinion, this is a lot easier to read and understand. Also, if I call this function now, vec equals new vector random, the help text down here reminds me that this is an optional value by putting brackets around the argument's name. So GameMaker is also providing me more information now about this function. So less code to write, easier to read, more help from GameMaker. But it's even better than that because, as I said at the start, you can set default values to more than just a value. So let me come over here to my alarm structs, which I did a tutorial on a while ago. This constructor function takes either 0 or 2 arguments. Without default values, I had to declare these struct variables to their default value and then check to see how many arguments were passed in. And if 2 arguments were passed in, I would then overwrite those variables. But now I can come up here and I can type in the default values that I want, and those values can be expressions. So I can not only declare that the default start time is 0, I can set the value of function to be an empty function. And after declaring their values up here, I can delete all of this code and immediately set these struct variables to the arguments, since I know that these arguments are either going to have the default value or the value actually passed in. And there's even more. I can come down to the set function, a static function internal to the struct alarm that either sets the alarm to the value passed in, or if no value is passed in, uses the default start time variable. And I can now create an argument and give it the default value of default start time and replace all of this code right here with that argument. In other words, default values also have access to other variables that are in scope. Let me also use default argument for this function too. I'll call it decrement and give it the default value of 1, and I can replace this section of code with the argument. And through the magic of editing, I can now put the before and after code side by side. And maybe this is my personal opinion, but I think that this version with default values is a significant improvement in code readability. One important note though is that arguments are still read in the order that they're passed in, so there's no way to use the default value for the first argument, say in this case default start time, and then pass in the second argument. But there you go. I have links to the notes about the 2.3.3 update down below, as well as a link to the manuals page just in case I forgot anything. And that's it. Thanks for watching.